Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Ginnie Graham show where all the cool kids want to be. So today we have Representative John Waldron, who is from Tulsa. And for purposes of this conversation, he's one of the most decorated history teachers and social studies teachers. I mean, he has lots of awards and before he entered the legislature. So today we're going to talk about the social studies standards revisions. And it somewhat gets into the weeds of policy because, I mean, if people are honest with themselves, they usually aren't interested in this kind of thing. But policy, as Representative Waldron and I know, that's where the reality of governance happens. And so I wanted maybe to start with the social studies standard revisions are up this year. And
That's right.
Representative or State Superintendent Ryan Walters has presented some. But before we begin to get into that, can you just briefly explain what's the point of these standards? I mean, what power do they have for the average student?
Well, every 7 years, we take a look at the state standards and see if they need revision because we want to meet the needs of the students of today, not the students of 7 years ago. They're designed to provide a baseline, a floor for what all the teachers are going to be doing in social studies across Oklahoma. And that means, we're going to teach, we're going to teach certain content, civics values, citizenship, and we're going to do it differentiated by a grade level across the board. We don't want it to be too sophisticated or it's going to restrict what teachers can do and maybe overload them. And we don't want it to be too vague that we have students coming out of school who don't know, certain basic things that are fundamental to being an American. So it's an important tool, but it's also a delicate one.
So you don't want to be too specific, but you don't want to be so broad that it waters it down. So it's that kind of
Right.
hitting that
Right.
ground.
I mean, remember,
Okay, so
yeah,
you said that these are
yes.
reviewed every 7 years, is that right? Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so getting into this year's. So the revisions for social studies came from a committee that included the Conservative Heritage Foundation and PragerU, not a university, but
Not a
a
university.
political advocacy PR company. And some of the revisions from what I've seen, and these are just a few, I'm going to print them out to get them right. It adds 40 references, new references to the Bible, Judeo-Christian values, and Christianity across all grades. But the details are pretty staggering, like in pre-K, we're talking 4-year-olds.
Yeah.
Right now, it's a one-page basic, know your directions, know what the flag looks like. But these standards make it twice as long and includes things, and this is a quote, requires them to identify primary sources, gather economic data from graphs, and be able to describe the concept of patriotism.
Yeah.
I think we're just trying to get 4-year-olds to wash their hands. I mean,
And tie their shoes.
gathering, I don't know if adults can do some of these. So yeah, second graders will have to identify Bible stories, high school kids describing the Christian idea of an equality of souls when comparing Judeo-Christian values and communism. And there's no references to other world religions that we know also have had, played a role in American history and government and social movements. But that's what did you find in these standards as a person who actually taught this? What are things that gave you pause? It's like, wait, this is not appropriate.
Well, I think a lot comes down to the syllable on which you put your emphasis. And by referencing the Bible over and over again, they are creating, they're putting a finger on the scale and creating this mindset that pushes students in a certain direction. We don't all subscribe to the same biblical worldview. We aren't all Christians. We aren't all religious. So putting those standards in, the level one problem is that we start to worry that we're imposing a particular kind of religion on students. And I believe that the First Amendment is designed to protect us from other people's religion so that we're free to practice or not practice as we see fit. But there are other problems too. We might be overloading the pre-K students and the kindergartners and setting them up to fail. And then we'll be like, well, I guess public schools don't work. We better send them off to the private schools. And finally, if we're not representing a worldview to the students that matches the world they see around them, then school is not going to seem relevant. So, for example, there's a passage in the standards that talks about Black towns in Oklahoma, an important subject. And some of the people who came to Oklahoma were so-called exodusters. They were conducting an exodus out of the South into the frontier. That's fine. But the standards then go and say, well, now you have to talk about the biblical exodus. I think I already established what you needed to know to understand the movement of exodusters into Oklahoma. They were fleeing Jim Crow, and it's not necessarily a time to go back and talk about, Moses and Joshua. It's by keeping hitting that point over and over again, they're creating a problem that I want to talk about further on.
Okay.
What I call a cheat code.
Well, I
That's
want to, I want to get into that because, so much of the standards conversation has been about what we've talked about, which is the argument about, and Walters is doing exactly what he said he'd do. He's
yeah.
he's promised to make Christianity part of mandatory in public schools. I mean, it's unconstitutional, but he's promised putting Christianity in schools, and he's doing that. But what I find interesting about the op-ed that you've written this weekend, which is a point, I guess I should have said of this conversation, is that you basically found that the fix is in, basically. You call it cheating, but you have found that the way these are written sort of, it would benefit conservative publishers, including the two that are on this committee, the Heritage Foundation and PragerU, which offers this. So can you explain a little bit about how this sort of puts the fix in or cheat?
Okay. Well, that's a great question. And as always, I've said from the beginning that when our superintendent is bringing up an issue that seems to be about, conservative values or culture or something, that we should always be focused on where the money is going.
Right.
So Oklahoma is a small textbook market. We don't buy a lot of textbooks compared to Texas. So textbook companies, when they pitch materials to us, they aren't inclined to adapt them specifically to Oklahoma standards. They're going to look at what's going on in Texas and California, and then we more or less go along with the standards of the big states. But by making these standards this specific with so many references to Christianity, we're starting to create this cheat code that the big textbook companies cannot or will not match. They're not going to put all the Oklahoma demands into a textbook they're marketing all around the country. In fact, what I'm afraid is going to happen is that they're just not going to market to us at all. So then if we lose the big textbook companies that are the gold standard for meeting curriculum needs for students, we're left with what the Heritage Foundation is putting out. Maybe Prager University is going to have stuff that's tailored to our curriculum. And maybe we're going to find that Christian homeschool networks have material that meets our standards. But you see, we've just created a standard that only appeals to a small number of vendors who are probably going to charge a premium to us to provide us with the material because they have the cheat code. We're going to end up spending a lot more money than we need to on material that's specific to these Oklahoma standards. Maybe not really the best for our kids. And certainly, though, it's going to be very good for a lot of people who are cozy with this current superintendent.
It reminds me of his Bible mandate, which was it was written so specific that it could only be Trump's Bible. I mean, so when you write it to where you know what the outcome is what you're finding with these standards. How much money are we talking about? I mean, we're talking a couple of million, multiple million?
Yeah, it's millions of dollars because after this, we're going to do the textbook adoptions for social studies. And then that's 700,000 students. Almost all of them are taking social studies every year. That's a lot of textbooks. That's a lot of curriculum guides, a lot of vendor input. And we're restricting the market down to a small group of people who are going to use their Christian focus to make a lot of money. So if we're getting those Bibles in the classroom, I think that on day one, the teacher should open up to the page where we see Jesus drive the moneylenders out of the temple, because we sure do seem to be inviting a lot in right now with these standards.
So what's the legislature's role in this?
Well, it's supposed to be a dull process. Writing the standards should be
No one
dull.
pays attention to these normally.
Nobody
Yeah.
should pay attention, but this time, because they found a way to hack the system to write standards that are going to benefit a small number of providers who are maybe, cozy, like I said, with the entities behind this, we're going to find that we're not serving the public interest. Um, as a history teacher, I like to teach during boring times about interesting things in the past.
Right.
But now we're in what the Chinese curse would call an interesting time where everything is in flux. And if we don't pay attention to this boring detail about standards, we're going to be moving a lot of money in directions we don't necessarily want.
So does the legislature have to approve these standards, or can they go
Yes, they
in
do.
without that? Okay, so does the full legislature, the House and the Senate, vote on these, or just one of the chambers, or just a committee? I mean, what's the
It goes to a full House vote, and then I think it goes on to the Senate as well.
okay?
It was so boring that I voted for the standard 7 years ago, and it passed unanimously. There was no reason to question the standards because I should say that most of the standards are written by Oklahoma educators attuned to the needs of Oklahoma students. But what happened this time was that our superintendent appointed an executive committee full of people who didn't live in Oklahoma who sprinkled in this cheat code. And if we don't pay attention, we're going to find that we have written a curriculum that's a content standard that's designed to meet the needs of the vendors and not the students.
This cannot help the students when they're competing nationally when they
Yeah.
get out of school, because that I have, a senior, and I'm in, and they're not competing just against other Oklahoma students. And so if they're not getting a full education, it's just not, I don't see how this ends well for all of Oklahoma kids who, want to
Yeah.
compete nationally and internationally. So what can people do who have concerns about this? I mean, who do they contact? Where do they go? How can their voice be heard?
Well, yeah, I would contact the State Board of Education while we're still in the public comment period and offer comments. It's easy to do. You can go to the OSDE website to find the link for public comment. And then you can put in very short messages like you think this standard should be deleted. And you can go and look at it line by line and say delete, delete, delete. And each one of those recommendations a citizen puts in is a data point for us and a chance for us to affect positive change on these standards. As a history teacher, I always liked students to know that it was a great big world outside the classroom and that they shouldn't be afraid to get out and explore it and have their impact on it. And I'm afraid this set of standards may not be preparing our kids for that great big world out there.
And so go to the OSDE, the Oklahoma State Department of
Mhm.
Education website to
Mhm.
public comment. I do not have much faith that the state school board is any kind of oversight. They've
Yeah.
agreed to everything. I've never seen any sort of pushback. So if we don't have a lot of faith in the state school board, do we contact the lawmakers then? I mean, how do I'm
I
assuming
think
that the
that's,
board's going to approve it without question. So then what's the
yeah.
next move?
I do think it's a great time to contact your legislator and tell them what you think education should be about. I mean, it's already we're putting $250 million into the private schools with voucher programs this year in so-called parent choice policies that are really going to be decided by the private schools themselves. Private schools don't have to take every kid. But since we do provide that avenue, if you want a religious instruction, go send your kid to private schools. We'll cut you a check. We don't need to insert so much religious content into our schools that they make our students feel uncomfortable.
Well, I
I do.
appreciate time. I'm sorry, I wanted to give you the last word. I appreciate the time you've spent to just explain the importance of what is normally a boring process, but in practice, this could really change the information our kids get and won't prepare them really for what to compete nationally with other kids. So what are sort of the last thoughts you want to leave with us on this subject?
The last thing I want to say is that it's very dangerous to mix church and state. It tends to corrupt both. And I want y'all to go back and think about that scene in Ferris Bueller's Day Off when the economics professor Ben Stein is talking about the Holly Smoot tariff. Does it raise or lower tariffs? Anyone? Anyone? The students could not have been more bored in that classroom. Now imagine we have 700,000 kids getting religious instruction from public school teachers, some of them emergency certified, some of them adjuncts, none, maybe a lot who don't have any background in studying the Bible, who are going to try to teach these things in that same Ben Stein voice to students who are going to get bored. And what are they going to see? They're going to see that religion is boring. They're going to see that our public schools and our churches seem to be coming together, and they're going to lose a little bit of faith in each. We've had freedom of religion in America for over 200 years. We've allowed lots of religious expression to flourish side by side in a marketplace of competitive ideas. To force a message into schools and to indoctrinate our kids with religious instruction is going to turn our students off to the notion of religion altogether. And if you really believe in faith, you're going to get the moneylenders out of the temple. You're going to get this Prager University stuff out of our curriculum. You're going to let kids learn for themselves. And in your homes, in your churches, feel free to explore your religious ideas there in true religious freedom. Religious freedom should be about protecting us from ideas being forced into our heads. That's what my faith teaches me, and that's also what my civics teach me. So I think we're making a big mistake here if we go down this road.
Okay. Well, thank you again. The session's going to be starting up pretty soon, and
Pretty
so
darn soon.
yes, pretty soon. So good luck with that, and thank you. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jen. I really appreciate you covering this important story.